Julian Croft existed in a world bleached of color. He moved through the sterile, bright aisles of the city's most exclusive grocery store, a ghost haunting a feast. Everything around him was a testament to life and abundance. Pyramids of glossy apples, fields of green lettuce misted with cool water, the warm, yeasty smell of baking bread. To him, it was all just noise, a collection of shapes and smells that failed to register, failing to stir anything inside the hollow cavern of his chest. He was a man made of glass, reflecting the world without absorbing any of its warmth. His shopping cart was nearly empty, holding only a prepackaged salmon fillet, a bag of quinoa, and a bottle of mineral water. It was a meal of pure function, designed for sustenance, not pleasure. It was the architecture of his life, functional, efficient, and utterly devoid of joy. He wore a charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection, a silent armor against a world he no longer wished to engage with. His face was a mask of cool neutrality, his eyes holding a permanent distance, a shadow of a pain so old it had become part of his bone structure. He paused by the dairy section, the hum of the refrigerators a monotonous drone that matched the one in his own mind. He was not looking at the artisanal cheeses or the organic milk. He was simply stopped, a ship becalmed in an indifferent sea. In his pocket, his fingers found the familiar, worn edges of a small silver locket. It was a nervous habit, a subconscious anchor to a time when the world had been vibrant, loud, and full. A time before the silence. A few aisles over, Alara navigated the same bright space with a completely different purpose. Her world was a tapestry of carefully managed colors, a budget spreadsheet brought to life. She was a single mother, a freelance illustrator whose income was as unpredictable as the city's weather. Her cart was a study in practicality and love. It held pasta, tomato sauce, bread, and a carton of milk. Sensible things. But tucked between the essentials was a small jar of strawberry jam, its cheerful red label a tiny flag of indulgence. Her daughter, Lily, a small girl of 6 with eyes the color of warm chocolate and hair that fell in a cascade of unruly curls, trailed beside her. She was the sun in Alara's universe, the source of all warmth. Lily chattered endlessly, her voice a bright melody against the store's low hum, pointing out a cereal box with a cartoon tiger, a display of extravagant cupcakes she knew they couldn't afford but loved to admire. Alara listened, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it was sometimes a physical ache. They had little, but they had this. They had each other. "Mommy, can we get the jam with the Real strawberries on the label?" Lily asked, her small hand clutching the precious jar. "Of course, sweet pea," Alara said, her smile genuine even as her mind did a quick calculation. The jam meant no coffee for her for the next few days, but it was a trade she would make 1,000 times over. Lily's happiness was her coffee. It was her everything. Their paths were destined to cross near the checkout lanes. Julian stood in line, a portrait of isolated wealth, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the cashier. Alara and Lily joined the line behind him, a small, vibrant island of quiet chatter and affection. Lily held her jar of jam, turning it over and over in her hands. She was trying to unscrew the lid, her small fingers struggling against the tight vacuum seal. Her brow furrowed in concentration. She grunted softly, a sound of pure, childish effort. Her mother was busy placing their items on the conveyor belt, her back turned for a moment. Lily looked at her own hands, then looked up. Her eyes landed on the tall, sad-looking man in front of them. He looked strong. He looked like the daddies in her storybooks who could lift anything. Unburdened by the complex rules of adult interaction, Lily took a step forward. She reached out a small hand and tugged gently on the fabric of Julian's expensive suit. He flinched, the unexpected touch a shock to his system. He looked down, his cool, gray eyes meeting Lily's earnest, brown ones. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Mister," she said, her voice clear and sweet. She held up the jar, a humble offering. "Can you open this jar? Daddy used to do it for me." The words struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. Each syllable was a perfectly aimed dart, piercing through years of scar tissue to find the raw, unhealed wound beneath. "Daddy used to do it for me." He saw a ghost of a memory, another little girl, with blonde hair and eyes the color of the sky, holding up a jar of paint, her own small face tilted up at him with the same trusting innocence. His Lily. The name was a shard of glass in his heart. He didn't move. He couldn't breathe. The air in his lungs had turned to cement. The bright lights of the store seemed to dim, the ambient noise fading into a distant roar. All he could see was this child, this stranger, who had just unknowingly spoken the language of his deepest grief. Alara turned, her eyes widening in horror. "Oh my goodness, Lily. I am so sorry," she gasped, rushing forward to gently pull her daughter back. "You can't bother people like that, sweetie." "I am so sorry, sir." She looked at the man's frozen, pale face, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. He looked offended, or worse, angry. She prepared for a sharp retort, a dismissive wave. But Julian didn't look angry. He looked broken. His carefully constructed mask had shattered, and for a fleeting second, she saw a glimpse of the profound, bottomless sorrow that lay beneath. His hand, which had been clenched at his side, slowly relaxed. He reached out, his movements stiff and mechanical, and took the small jar from Lily's hands. His large, capable hands, which signed multi-million-dollar contracts and commanded boardrooms, felt clumsy and foreign as they wrapped around the jar. He twisted the lid. It resisted for a moment, and then with a soft pop, the seal broke. The sound was small, insignificant, but in the silent space that had opened up between the three of them, it echoed like a gunshot. He handed the jar back to Lily, his fingers brushing against hers. Her skin was warm. It was a jolt, a spark of life that traveled up his arm and settled in his chest, a strange, unfamiliar sensation. He looked from the child to her mother. He saw the apology and anxiety in Alara's eyes, but he also saw a deep, resonant kindness, a gentleness he had not encountered in a very long time. "Thank you, mister," Lily said, beaming, completely unaware of the emotional devastation she had just caused. She hugged the jar to her chest, as if it were the world's greatest treasure. Julian found his voice, though it came out rough, scraped raw by disuse. It was no problem. He turned back to the conveyor belt, his own meager items looking pathetic and lonely. An impulse, foreign and powerful, rose up in him. It was a rebellion against the gray emptiness, a desperate reach for the flicker of warmth this child had just offered him. "Let me," he said, his voice stronger this time. He gestured to their groceries. "Please, allow me to pay for these." Alara was taken aback. "Oh no, thank you. That's very kind, but we couldn't possibly." Her pride was a soft but sturdy thing. She wouldn't accept charity, especially not from a man she had just mortified. "It's not charity," Julian said, meeting her eyes. He wanted her to understand. "It's a thank you." For the reminder, he didn't elaborate. He couldn't. The words were tangled up with memories he kept locked away. He simply placed his credit card on the scanner before she could protest further, a gesture of quiet finality. The transaction was complete in seconds. Alara stood there, flustered and unsure of what to do. The kindness was as unexpected as Lily's initial question. It was disarming. The man was an enigma of cold suits and sudden, inexplicable warmth. Thank you," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "You really didn't have to." To prevent the moment from dissolving into awkward silence, Julian spoke again, another impulse he didn't bother to question. "There's a small cafe near the entrance. Their hot chocolate is surprisingly good. Would you let me buy you one? As an apology for staring." The offer hung in the air, fragile and tentative. It was a bridge offered across a chasm of social status and personal grief. Alara looked at Lily, who was now smelling the open jar of jam with a look of pure bliss. Then she looked back at the man. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, a familiar ache she recognized from her own quiet moments after Lily was asleep. It was a loneliness that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the heart. "We would like that," she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time. "Wouldn't we, Lilybug?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "With marshmallows?" A ghost of a smile touched Julian's lips, a faint, rusty movement of muscles long dormant. "With extra marshmallows." The cafe was a pocket of warmth and calm tucked away from the bustling store. The air smelled of coffee beans and melted chocolate. They found a small table in a quiet corner, the polished wood warm beneath their elbows. The contrast between this cozy nook and the cold, impersonal aisles of the store was immediate and profound. Here, the light was softer, the sounds were muted, and the world seemed to shrink to the size of their small table. Julian felt as though he had stepped into a different dimension. For years, his public life had been a series of sterile boardrooms, opulent but empty restaurants, and the silent, echoing halls of his mansion. This simple cafe, with its mismatched chairs and crayon drawings taped to the walls, felt more real, more alive, than any of those places. He felt exposed, stripped of his corporate armor, sitting there in his perfect suit across from a woman in a worn but clean sweater and a child with a smudge of dirt on her cheek. Their hot chocolates arrived in large, cheerful mugs, piled high with miniature marshmallows. Lily plunged her face into hers with delighted abandon, emerging with a milky mustache that made her mother laugh. The sound of Alara's laugh was soft and musical. It was a sound of genuine, unforced happiness, and it landed in the quiet emptiness of Julian's heart like a drop of rain on parched earth. He watched them, a silent observer. He watched the easy, loving way Alara wiped Lily's face with a napkin, the gentle way she reminded her to say thank you. He saw the complete and utter trust in Lily's eyes as she looked at her mother. It was a whole universe of love contained in a single glance, a universe he had once inhabited and had been violently ejected from. The ache in his chest sharpened, but this time, it was different. It was laced with something other than pure grief. It was a bittersweet longing, a flicker of something. Hope was too strong a word. It was the possibility of a possibility. So, Alara began, her voice gentle, trying to ease the silence that had settled around him. You work in the city? It was a safe, neutral question. I do, Julian replied, his voice still stiff. I run a technology firm. He left out the part where he was the founder and CEO, where his name was synonymous with innovation and ruthless success. He didn't want to be Julian Croft, the billionaire mogul. He just wanted to be Julian, the man having a hot chocolate. That sounds important, she said, without a trace of the fawning admiration he was used to. It was a simple statement of fact. I'm an illustrator, mostly children's books. That sounds more important, he found himself saying, and he was surprised to find that he meant it. What was the value of developing a new algorithm compared to creating a world that could make a child feel safe and loved? Lily, having finished her drink, had procured a paper napkin and a stray crayon from the pot on the table. She began to draw, her small tongue sticking out of the corner of her mouth in concentration. She drew a tall, stick-figure man in a gray suit, a smaller woman with curly hair, and a tiny girl holding a red jar. Over their heads, she drew a bright yellow sun with a smiling face. Alara watched her daughter, a soft fondness in her eyes. Her father, he was an artist, too, she said, her voice dropping a little. He left when Lily was a baby. He said he couldn't handle the pressure. The responsibility, there was no bitterness in her tone, only a quiet sadness, a statement of a past she had long since processed and accepted. Julian didn't know what to say. The world of corporate negotiations had not prepared him for this kind of simple, human honesty. He had forgotten how to respond to genuine vulnerability. All he could offer was the truth. I'm sorry, don't be, she said, meeting his gaze. Her eyes were clear and steady. It was his loss. It left more room for me and my girl, she smiled, a resilient, beautiful smile that seemed to light up her entire face. It's just, sometimes she misses having a dad, even though she never really knew him. She creates one from storybooks and things she sees. Someone strong, who can open jars and reach the high shelves. His throat felt tight. He understood now. Lily hadn't just been asking for help. She had been casting him in a role he had once played, a role he had grieved for more than any other. Father, husband, protector. He looked down at his hands, resting on the table. They looked empty. He felt an overwhelming urge to tell her everything, to unburden himself of the story he had carried alone for 5 long years. He wanted to tell her about Sarah, his wife, her laughter like wind chimes. He wanted to tell her about his Lily, his bright, beautiful Lily, who loved strawberry jam and drawing suns with smiling faces. He wanted to tell her about the rainy night, the slick road, the screech of tires, and the deafening silence that followed. But the words wouldn't come. They were trapped behind a wall of ice he had built brick by painful brick. So he just sat there, silent, while Lily finished her drawing. She held it up for him to see. "It's us," she announced proudly. "We're a family having hot chocolate." Julian looked at the crude drawing. He saw the three figures, hand in hand under the happy sun. A crack formed in the ice around his heart. A small, almost imperceptible fissure, but it was there. And through it, for the first time in 5 years, a tiny, fragile ray of light managed to seep in. That one afternoon bled into another. It began with an accident, a chance meeting that felt less like chance and more like fate with each passing day. Julian found reasons, flimsy and transparent, to be where he thought they might be. A walk through the park near Alara's apartment complex, a visit to a bookstore he knew Lily loved. He told himself it was foolish, that he was a man clinging to a mirage, but he could not stop himself. The brief moments he spent in their company were like oxygen. Alara was cautious at first. She was a woman who had learned to be self-sufficient, to guard her heart and her daughters with a gentle but firm hand. A man like Julian, with his expensive suits and an aura of deep, unspoken sadness, was a complication she didn't need. And yet, she couldn't deny the pull. She saw past the wealth and the reserve to the profound loneliness he carried like a second skin. And she saw the way he looked at Lily, with a mixture of awe and pain that was utterly captivating. One sunny Saturday, he found them at the park playground. Lily was on the swings, her legs pumping as she tried to reach the sky. Alara sat on a nearby bench, sketching in a notepad. Julian approached slowly, feeling like an intruder on their perfect, self-contained world. "Hello," he said, his voice quiet. Alara looked up, and a slow smile spread across her face. It was a smile of genuine welcome, and it did something strange to his insides. "Hello, Julian. Fancy meeting you here." "My usual route," he lied, gesturing vaguely. "For a walk." Lily spotted him, and her face lit up. "Julian," she squealed, letting the swing die down. She ran to him, her small arms wrapping around his legs in an uninhibited hug. The gesture was so pure, so unexpected, that Julian froze. He tentatively placed a hand on her head, his fingers sinking into her soft curls. The warmth of her, the solid reality of her, was overwhelming. They spent the afternoon together. He pushed Lily on the swings, his movements awkward at first, then more confident. He listened as Alara talked about her latest book project, a story about a lost firefly searching for its family. He found himself talking, too, not about his past, not yet, but about small things. About the type of coffee he liked, about a tree he remembered from his childhood home. Small, human details he hadn't shared with anyone in years. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass, he knew he didn't want the day to end. "I have a large, empty house," he said, the words coming out before he could censor them. "And a cook who makes far too much food for one person. Would you and Lily have dinner with me tonight?" The invitation was a leap of faith. His house was his sanctuary, his fortress of solitude. Inviting them in was tantamount to lowering the drawbridge. Alara hesitated for only a moment. She looked at the hope in his eyes, a fragile thing he was trying so hard to hide. She looked at Lily, who was looking up at Julian as if he were a friendly giant from one of her stories. "We'd love to," she said. Julian's home was nothing like Alara had imagined. It wasn't ostentatious or gaudy. It was a masterpiece of minimalist architecture, all clean lines, glass walls, and muted colors. It was beautiful, but it was also profoundly sterile. It felt less like a home and more like a museum, a silent, pristine monument to a life that had been put on hold. There were no photographs on the walls, no clutter on the tables, no sign that anyone truly lived there. Lily, however, was undaunted. She explored the vast, open spaces with wide-eyed wonder, her small footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floors. She found a grand piano in the living room and gently pressed a single key. The clear, solitary note hung in the silent air, a sound of life in a place that had been quiet for too long. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 20. Their three-place settings looked small and isolated at the enormous mahogany table. But as they ate, something shifted. Lily's bright chatter filled the cavernous room. Alara's quiet warmth seemed to seep into the cold surfaces. For the first time, The house felt less like an echo chamber of grief and more like a space that could, potentially, hold happiness again. After dinner, while their plates were being cleared by a discreet housekeeper, Lily grew tired. She curled up on a vast white sofa, her head in her mother's lap, and fell asleep. The sudden quiet felt different this time. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a peaceful one, filled with the soft sound of a child's breathing. Julian and Alara sat together, a comfortable distance between them. He was nursing a glass of water, his fingers tracing patterns on the cold condensation. In his other hand, in his pocket, he was clutching the locket. Alara noticed the gesture. She had seen him do it many times. It was his tell, the unconscious movement that betrayed the turmoil beneath his calm surface. "That locket," she said softly, not as an intrusion, but as a gentle observation. "It must be very important to you." Julian's hand stilled. He looked at her, and in the soft lamplight, he saw not curiosity, but a deep, knowing empathy. He saw a safe harbor, and the dam he had so carefully constructed for 5 years finally, irrevocably, broke. He pulled the locket from his pocket and held it in his palm. He opened it. Inside were 2 tiny, faded photographs. One was of a woman with a radiant smile and laughing eyes. The other was of a little girl, no older than Lily, with blonde pigtails and a mischievous grin. "My wife, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "And our daughter. Her name was Lily, too." He told her everything. He spoke of the life they had built, the love they had shared, a life so full of light and noise and beautiful, ordinary chaos. He spoke of the rainy night, the business dinner he was rushing home from, the headlights of the other car, the sickening crunch of metal. He had been in the hospital for a week with broken ribs and a concussion. When he woke up, his world had ended. They were gone. He spoke of the guilt, a monstrous, living thing that had consumed him. The what-ifs that had haunted his every waking moment and tormented his dreams. What if he had left the dinner earlier? What if he had told them to take a different route? What if he had been with them? The guilt had been his only companion, the architect of the empty, gray world he now inhabited. Alara didn't speak. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell him it wasn't his fault. She simply listened. She let his story fill the space between them, honoring his pain with her quiet, unwavering presence. When he finally fell silent, his face etched with a grief so profound it was almost unbearable to witness, she reached out. She didn't touch him. Instead, she gently picked up the sleeping Lily and settled her more comfortably on the sofa. Then, she looked at him, her own eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. It was the perfect thing to say. It was not pity, it was gratitude. It was an acknowledgement of the immense trust he had just placed in her. In that moment, something fundamental shifted. He had shared the heaviest part of his soul, and she had not run. She had not recoiled in the face of his tragedy. She had simply held the space for him. He felt lighter. The crushing weight on his chest had eased, just a fraction, but enough for him to take a full, deep breath. Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring something incoherent. She reached out a small hand, her fingers brushing against Julian's arm. He looked down at the sleeping child, a mirror of his lost daughter, but so wonderfully, uniquely herself. He looked at Alara, a woman of incredible strength and grace. And he looked at the drawing Lily had made, which he had carefully placed on the mantelpiece. The 3 stick figures, holding hands under a smiling sun. He wasn't replacing his past. He knew that now. Nothing could ever replace what he had lost. But perhaps, just perhaps, he was being given a chance to build a future. A future he never thought he would have. A future he was terrified he didn't deserve. The weeks that followed were a fragile, tentative bloom. Julian, Alara, and Lily began to weave their lives together, creating a delicate new pattern. They fell into a gentle routine. Weekday evenings often found Julian at Alara's cozy, cluttered apartment, helping Lily with a puzzle or simply sitting at the kitchen table while Alara cooked. The smells of garlic and herbs, the sounds of Lily's laughter and Alara's soft humming, began to overwrite the silence of his own empty mansion. His house, too, began to change. One Saturday, they went shopping, and he let Lily pick out a bright pink beanbag chair for the cavernous living room. It was a splash of defiant, joyful color in a sea of beige and gray. Alara brought over a potted plant, a sturdy ficus that she placed near a window. "Every home needs something that's alive and growing," she'd said simply. The house began to breathe again. Julian was changing. The lines of tension around his eyes softened. The ghost of a smile visited his lips more frequently. His employees at the office noticed the shift. The formidable, unapproachable Julian Croft started leaving work at a reasonable hour. He was overheard on the phone once, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, debating the serious merits of dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. He was learning to live in the present. He was discovering the simple joy of flying a kite in the park, the sticky mess of baking cookies, the profound peace of reading a bedtime story. Each moment was a small act of healing, a quiet rebellion against the grief that had held him captive for so long. He was not just an observer anymore. He was a participant. The bond between him and Alara deepened in the quiet moments. It was a connection built not on grand romantic gestures, but on shared glances over Lily's sleeping head, on the comfortable silence of washing dishes together, on the profound understanding that passed between them without words. He admired her resilience, her unwavering optimism, her ability to create beauty and love from so little. She, in turn, saw the deep well of kindness and loyalty beneath his guarded exterior. She was falling in love not with the billionaire, but with the man who was painstakingly learning how to be whole again. The true test of their burgeoning new reality came in the form of an invitation. It was for the annual Croft Enterprises Gala, a lavish affair that was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. It was a world of power, influence, and judgment. A world Julian had long navigated with ease, but one he was now hesitant to re-enter, especially with Alara and Lily. "You don't have to," he told Alara, holding the thick, embossed invitation. "It's a lot. It's not our world. It's your world, Julian," she corrected him gently. "And if we're going to be in your life, we want to be in all of it, not just the quiet parts." Her courage gave him strength. And so, they went. Alara wore a simple but elegant blue dress she had found at a consignment shop. She looked radiant, her natural grace outshining the diamond-clad women around her. Julian, in his tuxedo, stood taller, a quiet pride in his eyes as he held her hand. Lily was with a trusted babysitter, but her excitement for their fancy party had been infectious. The ballroom was a glittering spectacle of crystal chandeliers and champagne fountains. But as soon as they entered, Julian felt the old walls begin to rise again. The air was thick with whispered speculation and curious stares. He could feel the eyes on them, could almost hear the questions. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? The trigger came from a man named Marcus Thorne, a business rival with a smile as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. He cornered Julian by the bar, his eyes raking over Alara with a dismissive, appraising glance. "Croft," Marcus began, his voice oozing false cordiality. "I see you've recovered. You certainly didn't waste any time finding a replacement for Sarah. A much more economical model, it seems." The words, cruel and calculated, hit Julian with the force of a physical assault. Replacement, the word he feared most. The accusation that this new happiness was a betrayal of his past, a cheap imitation of the love he had lost. It tapped directly into his deepest, most secret insecurity, that he was forgetting Sarah and his Lily, that he was disrespecting their memory by daring to feel joy again. His blood ran cold. The warmth of Alara's hand in his suddenly felt like a brand. The laughter and music of the gala faded into a deafening roar in his ears. He looked at Alara, her face open and trusting, and all he could see was the ghost of Sarah. The guilt, which had been receding, came rushing back like a tidal wave, black and suffocating. He couldn't breathe. He dropped Alara's hand. "Excuse me," he muttered, his voice a clipped, unrecognizable monotone. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone and bewildered in the middle of the crowded room. He found a deserted balcony, the cold night air a welcome shock to his system. He leaned against the railing, his heart pounding, his mind a maelstrom of panic and self-loathing. Marcus was right. What was he doing? He was playing house, pretending he could have a normal life. He was putting Alara and Lily in a position they didn't ask for, exposing them to this ugly, judgmental world. More than that, he was dishonoring his family. The love he felt for Alara felt like a betrayal. The joy Lily brought him felt like an erasure of his own daughter. He retreated into the only place he felt safe, the cold, familiar fortress of his grief. He became the man he had been in the grocery store. Remote, unreadable, made of glass. When he returned inside, he found Alara, her face a mask of hurt and confusion. He couldn't meet her eyes. "My driver will take you home," he said, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. "I have business to attend to." "Julian, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice pleading. "What did that man say to you?" "It's nothing," he lied. This was a mistake. We're from different worlds, Alara. It can't work." Each word was a betrayal of what they had built, but he couldn't stop them. He was pushing her away to protect her, to protect himself, to protect the sacred memory of the dead. It was a twisted, panicked logic, but it was all he had. He watched her leave, her shoulders slumped in defeat. He had done it. He had destroyed the most beautiful thing that had happened to him in 5 years. And the pain of it was a cold, hard confirmation that he was right. He didn't deserve happiness. His only purpose was to be a living memorial to what he had lost. The days that followed were a descent back into the gray. Julian threw himself into his work, a punishing schedule of 16-hour days and sleepless nights. He didn't answer Alara's calls or texts. He instructed his staff that he was not to be disturbed. His mansion became a tomb once more, silent and pristine. The pink beanbag chair looked like a garish wound in the living room. The ficus plant began to wilt from neglect. He was miserable. The silence he had once craved was now unbearable, filled with the ghosts of laughter and a child's chatter. The solitude that had been his shield now felt like a prison cell of his own making. He had chosen grief, but he had forgotten how sharp its edges were. Alara was heartbroken. She replayed the night of the gala over and over in her mind, trying to understand what had happened. Julian's withdrawal was absolute and brutal. It was as if the man she had come to know and love had never existed, replaced by the cold, distant stranger she had first met. She felt a fool for letting him in, for allowing herself and her daughter to become attached to a man who was so clearly broken. Lily was the one who suffered most, in her own quiet way. She didn't understand the complexities of adult emotions. All she knew was that Julian, her friend, the man who pushed her on the swings and read her stories, was gone. "Is Julian mad at us, Mommy?" she asked one night, her small face clouded with worry. "No, sweetie," Alara said, her own heart breaking as she stroked her daughter's hair. "He's just busy. He has a lot of important work to do." It was a weak explanation, but it was all she could offer. The turning point came a week after the gala. Julian was in his home office late one night, staring blankly at a spreadsheet that made no sense. He felt a familiar lump in the pocket of his tuxedo jacket, which was still draped over a chair. He reached inside, expecting to find the locket. But his fingers closed around a piece of paper. It was folded into a small square. He pulled it out and unfolded it. It was the napkin drawing Lily had made at the cafe all those weeks ago. The tall stick-figure man, the woman with curly hair, the little girl with the jam jar, the smiling son. "My family having hot chocolate." He stared at the simple, innocent drawing, and the ice around his heart didn't just crack. It shattered. The image was so pure, so full of love and acceptance. It wasn't a drawing of a replacement family. It was a drawing of a new family. Lily hadn't been trying to erase his past. She had been offering him a future. He saw his actions for what they were, not an act of loyalty to his lost family, but an act of pure, unadulterated fear. He was terrified of loving again because he was terrified of losing again. The pain of losing Sarah and his Lily had nearly destroyed him, and he couldn't bear the thought of going through that again. So he had preemptively destroyed the source of his new joy, convincing himself it was a noble sacrifice. He looked around his silent, empty mansion. This wasn't honoring their memory. This was a prison. Sarah wouldn't have wanted this for him. She had been a woman full of life and laughter. She would have wanted him to live. She would have wanted him to be happy. She would have loved Alara's strength and Lily's bright spirit. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He sank into his chair, the drawing clutched in his hand, and he wept. He wept for Sarah and his Lily. He wept for the 5 years he had lost to the gray fog of grief. And he wept for the terrible mistake he had just made with Alara and her Lily. He had thrown away his second chance out of fear. But as the tears subsided, a new feeling took root. It was a fierce, determined clarity. He was done being afraid. He was done living in the past. He loved Alara. He loved Lily. And he was going to fight for them. He was going to fight for the future they could have, a future that didn't erase his past, but honored it by choosing to live and love again. He stood up, his movements filled with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. He knew what he had to do. He didn't call. He didn't text. An apology this profound couldn't be delivered through a device. He drove to Alara's apartment building, the napkin drawing on the passenger seat beside him like a sacred text. It was late, but he didn't care. He parked the car and walked to her door, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was it. This was the most important negotiation of his life. He knocked on the door, his hand trembling slightly. After a moment, it opened. Alara stood there in a faded robe, her hair tied back, her face etched with exhaustion and surprise. When she saw him, her expression hardened. The hurt was plain to see in her eyes. "Julian," she said, her voice flat. "It's late. I know. I am so sorry to bother you, but I couldn't wait," he began, his own voice unsteady. "Can I please come in? For just a moment?" She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, a gatekeeper to the warmth he had so carelessly thrown away. She looked past him, into the dimly lit hallway, then back at his face. She saw the desperation there, the raw vulnerability he was no longer trying to hide. With a weary sigh, she stepped back and let him in. Her apartment was warm and smelled of cinnamon. A half-finished puzzle was on the coffee table. It felt like home. It felt like everything he had been missing. "Alara," he started, turning to face her. He didn't offer excuses. He offered the truth, raw and unvarnished. "I am so sorry. For everything. For how I acted at the gala. For leaving you there. For ignoring you. There is no excuse for my behavior. It was cruel and cowardly, and I hurt you." He paused, taking a breath. What that man said, it triggered something in me. A fear I've been living with for 5 years. The fear that if I allowed myself to be happy again, if I let myself love you and Lily, that I was somehow betraying the memory of my wife and daughter, that I was replacing them. He held out the napkin drawing. But I was wrong. So terribly wrong. This isn't about replacement. It's about building something new. You and Lily, you didn't walk into the hole they left in my life. You built a new room in my heart, a room I thought I had sealed off forever. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't try to hide them. I pushed you away because I was terrified. I am terrified of losing you. The thought of feeling that kind of pain again, it paralyzed me. But living without you this past week has been a different kind of death. A gray, empty nothing. I would rather risk the pain of loss 1,000 times over than face another day without you and Lily in my life. He took a step closer, his eyes pleading with hers. "I love you, Alara. I love your kindness, your strength, your beautiful heart. I love your daughter as if she were my own. I know I have no right to ask this after how I've treated you, but I am asking anyway. Please, give me another chance. Not just to be in your life, but to build a life with you. All of us. Together." Alara stood there, silent, tears streaming down her own cheeks. She had listened to his every word, her own heart aching with the weight of his confession. She saw the truth in his eyes, the profound love and the devastating fear all tangled together. She saw the man she had fallen in love with, stripped of all his armor, offering her his broken, hopeful heart. She didn't speak. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. He held her tightly, a desperate, grateful embrace, breathing in the scent of her hair. It was an embrace of forgiveness, of understanding, of a new beginning. "I love you too, Julian," she whispered into his shirt. "But you have to promise me. No more walls. No more running. We face the ghosts together." "Together," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Always." A few months later, the world was painted in the warm hues of autumn. The air was crisp, and the leaves were a riot of red and gold. The scene was familiar, the bright, abundant aisles of the same grocery store where their story had begun. But this time, everything was different. Julian pushed the shopping cart, his movements easy and relaxed. He wore a soft cashmere sweater, not a suit of armor. In the cart, nestled amongst the groceries, sat Lily, her legs dangling, a happy queen on her throne. She held a jar of strawberry jam. Alara walked beside them, her hand resting naturally on the small of Julian's back. They moved together, a comfortable, synchronized unit, their conversation a low, happy murmur about what to have for dinner. They were not two separate, lonely worlds anymore. They were a family. As they reached the checkout, Lily held up her jar. "Julian," she said, her voice bright. "Can you open this for me?" Julian stopped the cart. He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. He took the jar from her. His hands, steady and sure, twisted the lid. With a soft pop, the seal broke. He handed it back to her, ruffling her hair. He looked over at Alara, who was watching them with a look of pure, unadulterated love. He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. The silver locket was still in his pocket, but he no longer needed to clutch it like an anchor. His anchors were here, solid and warm, right beside him. The past was not gone. It was a part of him, a landscape of love and loss that had shaped him. But it was no longer his only country. He had found a new home. He looked at the woman he loved, and at the child who had, with one simple, innocent question, cracked open his world and let the light back in. He was no longer the wounded executive, the ghost in the feast. He was Julian, a partner, a father. He was found.